I came from outside the world of law to BLP 3 years ago. I'd never really got the sense of sort of being a project manager or process efficiency beforehand. I'd kind of done quite a lot of things in another sector. And within probably about my first week at BLP, I was told there was a process efficiency project and team. It turned out that process efficiency had been given to probably the least process-driven or efficient partner. And funnily enough, it had been going for about a year or so and had produced a very long document and wasn't really doing a great deal beyond that. So I've sort of been heavily involved in my time at BLP in looking at where the legal sector is going and specifically where our real estate sector business is going. And in doing that, it's impossible not to look at process and efficiency and to think about the different ways in which we need to be delivering work to clients. That's sort of what I've done for the last 3 years. I'm in the process of sort of moving on to do more firm-wide work at BLP. And what I'm going to sort of talk about is just my experience. I've not found it impossible to talk to lawyers. I've not found it impossible to persuade people to change, though I recognise the challenges that other people have set out here. And those challenges have existed for me and exist at BLP. What I'm going to talk about is just how I've tried to deal with them and the extent to which that's worked in the case studies that I'm going to talk about. I thought it might help us to start with just say what is process and what is efficiency. Some definitions. I think what's important there is to remember that process is about actions to produce something. It should be natural and it should be change, should be involved in it. In other words, it's about sort of what you get out of it and some way of working differently, and in some shape or form, it should be evolutionary, not wholly different from anything that's gone before. And as far as efficiency goes, again, those are the definitions, but what I take from that is it's about the relationship between what you put in and what you get out of it. We can dress it all up in lots of jargon and theories and so on, but ultimately it's really kind of quite straightforward. And it may well be the case that law, unlike some other industries, has not, for quite a large part of its history, had to worry too much about what it put in, because kind of what came out the other end was profits, and that now that's shifting. But I think the more complicated we make process and efficiency, the more resistance or bafflement we get from the people that we're talking to, and therefore the harder it becomes to change anything. The fact that the world of law is changing, I think, is hardly news to any of us, and indeed even our partners may now realise that the world today is unlikely to go backwards again and is probably changing in ways they can't quite fathom. I'm going to go through this fairly briskly. Profitability, an obvious driver of change. We know it's not just cyclical. What clients want is changing and is, of course, impacting on how firms need to change. The lawyers themselves want different things. We've got different generations coming into the workplace. There are different opportunities. They have different views in a whole range of ways of what they want from their daily working life and their careers at law firms. And that, too, is driving change in how we do work. And then we have other legal employees, again, for a number of different reasons, coming in different shapes and forms to the firms in which we work and the areas in which we work, and again, looking for different things in terms of the kinds of work that they want and are able to do. To say that partners don't necessarily embrace the idea of change and efficient processes is a truism and an understatement. If we're going to get it to work, though, I think it's important that we try and kind of deconstruct that a bit and say what's actually going on there in terms of the resistance to change. None of this, it seems to me, is wholly unreasonable. I'd also sort of note that your average lawyer may not be enthralled by the idea of process. That doesn't apply to every lawyer. There are certainly people I work with who are quite excited about the idea of doing things differently. change of any sort is challenging. There are far more dynamic environments than a law firm where people find it difficult to embrace a different way of doing things. These are changing the way that we deliver legal work is pretty fundamental to the business of being a lawyer. And as I've tried to sort of indicate here, it's about what happens next to me, the lawyer, whether that's the junior lawyer or the senior partner. What happens to my business? Legal training is all about the evaluation of risk. And we all know that if you change something, you introduce a degree of risk. You may or may not be able to manage it. But the notion that lawyers don't exactly sort of jump out of bed and go, hey, let's change the way that we do things, I think is not wholly to be unexpected. And if we take that on board, I think it makes it easier to then consider how do we most appropriately introduce change and get it to work. So I've called this kind of conquering fear, and this is the kind of triangle that I think has to be incorporated into getting change to work in a law firm, not just process change. Legal brains like logic. You can't just drive change through. Law firms are not corporates, but even if they were, these are not the kind of people who just go, okay, that's fine, I'll do it. You have to try to appeal to the whys and wherefores of doing this, the benefits to the individual, and to keep people on side if the change is not ultimately to be rejected, either by the individual or by the firm. And the carrot and the stick, of course, have a role in taking everyone with you. Carrots, I think, are around thinking about profitability, about credit, about the personal performance indicators and the drivers for each individual within the firm, and trying to work out how what you're trying to do is going to dovetail with those. My experience says lawyers are very linear people, and it's a sort of, if you can explain to them that this is what will happen as a result of something, that takes them quite a long way down that road. Sticks kind of matter too, and the relevant sticks for process are around shutting off alternative ways of doing things. How and when you do that will depend on exactly how you want to operate and what it is that you're trying to do. But doing that matters if you're going to get everyone travelling down the road that you want to get them to travel down. So putting theory into practice, I've called this Project Elsie. This was what you might kind of non-technically call a basket case at the point at which I, along with a couple of others, got involved in it. At the time that it was taken on, it seemed like a good piece of work to have. Of course, no one thought about how long might it be around for, exactly how we should price it, exactly how we're going to resource it, or indeed sort of stop to try and scope out how large this particular project might be. I think at the current moment, it's probably been with the firm for about 6 years. I got involved in it probably about 2.5 years ago, so it had then been around for sort of 3+ years. No one had really designed a way of doing it which assumed it would be there for that long. And as a result, it was sort of a bit all over the place. I think we probably all have projects like that. There were an awful lot of people involved. There were lots and lots of different ways of doing things, and no one really loved it, owned it, felt they were truly responsible for delivery, and therefore sort of was engaged in sorting it out. It got kicked around like a football between various different people. Everyone groaned when it was mentioned, and particularly when the sort of numbers came out on it. And as a result of all that, it wasn't really delivering a great service to the client. The client, having sort of signed up to it, felt they had to put up with it, but they also grumbled, which didn't help the love and affection for it. But turning it round, I think, is not just about breaking the work down into steps, taking one of the process technology tools, playing with it, and sort of suddenly, magically, the world changes. In order to apply process to, as I say, what was a sprawly, fairly typical law firm project, I think it's important to put in place the conditions that are going to support delivering a successful process. And this sort of circle goes round. if you don't build trust and create sponsorship to start with, you've got no one who's going to drive it through. It's not just a process task. You have to involve the lawyers together with your process people, and that's the sort of dynamic that can successfully change, I think, the way that you do things. And then, if you don't put the time and effort into getting it right, it probably won't work either. Client buy-in and engagement to that is not difficult to achieve, and that, I think, can make all the difference. But these things don't change overnight. I've mentioned there sort of distilling knowledge. Again, there's nothing very clever or magical about this. External theory on how you do process, which, we're all familiar with a number of the badges and tags around that, and sometimes it seems very attractive to sort of import those things into our firm. There's nothing wrong with that, but my view is that external theory will only get you so far. As others have said, lawyers are quite specialist creatures, and you have at least to look at how you import a theory successfully and adapt it for the environment that is the law firm. Distilling knowledge is really about saying there is a basic process to every task, but when you're trying to get process to stick, don't forget or ignore the way that we do things here and the sense of our process and our firm and our clients. That shouldn't act as a brake on it, but it should ensure that if you combine that with the best way to do things and things that you know from outside, you can get a process which works with the people and the place that you're trying to apply it to. So this is broadly what we did, and what we did with Project Elsie, and what we do consistently with other projects of this sort within BLP. We took out all the different and brought together all the different versions of how we do things. And we have within BLP a central process team which is able to provide that intelligent and neutral, objective facilitation of what can sometimes be slightly clashing and emotive perspectives from the people who have been involved so far. And then you have to distill and refine and refine and refine again the process to get to the best way of doing things and to support breaking it down to an appropriate level to re-engineer it. And technology can help there, but again, it's not going to do it for you. There's a lot of sort of thinking and talking to get to that right process. You have to manage the technology. There's no sort of magic bullet out there. We use a number of different systems, we tweak them as we need to, and depending on what the tasks are, we break them down to a greater or lesser extent. That also relates to who is going to be doing the work. Re-engineering process is an opportunity to move work down to what I would describe as the lowest possible level that can do that piece of work. And also, on Project Elsie and on the other projects I come on to talk about, we've tried to say, is there a different way of building a team around here? Can we break out of the conventional structure of how we do things and create different roles and more appropriate ways to do this particular type of work? And throughout, engage the client, because the process doesn't start and stop within the law firm and the team that's delivering the work. It starts and stops with the client. And to a greater or lesser extent, the client and the way that they work will impact on the process that you're going to put in. Clearly, every project is different, but to give you a feel for what this achieved, in terms of Project Elsie, we moved from a team that was very senior, very, very dispersed, and therefore costing a lot of money, to a much more highly leveraged team, that it was the right level for the work type and for the fees. And in doing so, we also increased productivity beyond the project, because a whole lot of people who had had small bits of their time tied up in doing this kind of work were suddenly free to be redeployed to other kinds of work and to other more profitable work. So we freed up a lot of time within the department through doing it. We also saw massive improvements in WIP management, even though actually what we've been looking at was the process for doing the work. It wasn't particularly the process for the financial management of the account. We saw the client service get better, probably the cost to the client go down, and we saw the profitability to the firm go up. So the project started to find a better approach to the organisation of the work, but through the application of process to this particular area of work, it delivered a lot more. And it also acted as a flagship within BLP as a sort of proof of concept for what you could do if you applied process more generally. That in turn led on to what is currently my key project, which is the development of the Manchester Legal Delivery Centre for BLP. That builds directly from the sort of project work that we've done with process to take that to a different level. So instead of one client or one project, we're looking at how we deploy process for multiple clients and for multiple business areas. We're looking at how we create different kinds of teams, taking some of the ideas that we got from Project Elsie around highly leveraged teams with a supervisory layer in there. We're building from what we learned around the technology and how we can adapt it to do new things with technology and process there. And we're looking at the integration with the client. In this case, the client is BLP itself, because BLP commissions the work on behalf of external clients from Manchester. And through doing that, what we're seeing is that we can use process in various forms. Sometimes it's process heavy, sometimes it's process, what I would call process light, to drive faster delivery to deadlines, and I would argue also to deliver higher quality. BLP Manchester opened its doors at the beginning of August. It's very early days. The response so far from clients, internal and external, who are accessing work through it is incredibly positive. We're also trying, people have talked about continuous improvement. Project Elsie wasn't a kind of one-off lightning bulb moment and the world changed the next day. We took ideas about how we did things and we refined and refined and refined them, probably over the course of about 6 to 9 months to deliver the results that I've set out for you in over about an 18-month period. Within Manchester, as it's a permanent process centre, we're setting up for continuous improvement from the start. All of us introduce processes for different reasons. Cost control and cost reduction are key, but certainly for us within Manchester, it's also about delivering value and the right price and managing quality more effectively in some areas of work than we're able to within the kind of setup that we've got in London, and changing the way that we do things. To achieve that, we need to think about what are the right measurement tools. We need some process around process in order to make sure that actually we're achieving what we set out to, which goes beyond, I would suggest, actually just delivering the work for the client. To end, I just sort of wanted to pose to you the question of where process takes all of us. What's the end game on what we're doing? I've sort of talked you through one process project, which is then, for BLP, led to setting up a process centre, and indeed putting processes in across other parts of our business in London. I believe that process is part of what fundamentally changes what law and law firms will be. Because if you think about these various steps that I've set out here, you have different people coming in, you need different kinds of resource. Process affects how we train lawyers, and people have spoken about sort of baking project management into legal training. Process and how to work with process, whether lawyers are going to be part of that or simply commissioners of it, is also an important skill to breed in. Of course, it affects what work is done where, what support is needed for that work, and I've suggested at the end, what we reward is also important. There have to be the appropriate incentives to get people to use process. And then in turn, that flows into, I think, what kind of changes we will see in law over the next 5 to 10 years. Process is a big part of how legal delivery is changing, and that in turn is affecting, I would suggest, every element of what law firms and the business of law is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle.